Alright, today we'll be tearing down a Yamaha Grizzly 550. We'll start pulling the head off, pull the flywheel, the stator, starter, gear assembly, the clutches. We got the secondary drive and the primary drive up front here. It is a fully automatic. So we're going to pull the cam chain sprocket cover off. We're going to pull both valve adjustment covers off. And you wouldn't have to pull these covers off, but we will just to show you how it looks here. We've got 12mm bolts up top. These are the head bolts. We've got Allens on either side here, and these shouldn't be very tight. Now I'm not going to loosen them quite yet because I want to loosen this cam chain tensioner. Move that side so you can see it here. This is the cam chain tensioner, and you'll want to remove this before you start pulling the head apart. If you don't, there'll be too much pressure on that cam chain and it won't allow you to pull that head off or pull that cam chain off of the sprocket. We'll take those two Allen bolts out, and then what we'll do is I take a little hammer. You can do about anything, but just tap on it and it'll pop that out. And there's your cam chain tensioner. Now we'll go ahead and loosen these head bolts, 12mm bolts. Alright, there's actually just 4 of the actual head bolts right here. We've got 12mm bolts, or 12mm nuts on either of the bottom side here. So we'll take those, and since they're upside down, you'll turn them the opposite way of what you would normally do. And these you'll want to torque all these down when you're putting this head back together. Now on this one, it does look like it is a bolt. Generally, they're nuts that go on studs that are already in there. So one on below the exhaust, and then we'll take these Allens out as well. And there's your head bolts. We're going to take two 10mm, two 10mm nuts off, or bolts off of this cam chain. And if you can see here, try to turn this so you're able to see it, but I'll pull these off and then I'll show you which ones I pulled off. So we pulled these 2 bolts off of the cam, and that'll allow us to pull that sprocket off of there, and then that chain. And that'll allow us to slip that head off of there, and then we'll actually just put these bolts back in. I'm going to grab a small screwdriver just to be able to kind of pull this sprocket off. And there's the decompression mechanism that's kind of in front of that, so that'll take a little moving around, but we'll pull that and then we'll go back together. Now on this cam chain sprocket, there's holes that we'll need to line up, and we'll put these bolts back in. That allowed us to pull that cam chain off of there. Now this head is ready to come off. I'm just putting this sprocket back on there to kind of hold it. There's an oil line that comes down here too that we'll have to pull. There's an Allen that's actually attached to the cylinder, but we'll have to remove that to get it out of the way. 17mm banjo bolts clear down on the case. And I'm going to go ahead and remove those just to get them out of the way. One is clear down by the front output coupling. One's right by that oil filter, in between the coupling and the oil filter. So we pull both of those, and that'll allow us to pull that oil line, pull this head off here. And it'll just, simple as that, pulling it off. There's the valves. We got 2 intake, 2 exhaust. And we got, actually, if you can see there, one exhaust is broken. Looks like it maybe wasn't timed right and was run that way. Or maybe it skipped timing, but cam chain looks good. Guides look good, so I'm going to guess that it wasn't timed properly. So we just pulled one guide out here, and you can see the cam chain here. I'm going to go ahead and pull this cylinder, and it's just 2 Allens. If there's dirt in there, I like to clean that out before I stick that Allen in there. Then we've got 4 cylinder torque bolts there. The walls look and feel good on that cylinder, but we'll do some measuring before we go back together. These are 14mm bolts. Make sure you torque these down when you're going back together. There's the bolts there. And the cylinder is ready to come off. There's a little tab right here that we can put a little bit of pressure. You definitely do not want to put too much pressure, but just enough to kind of break that seal. Pull that off. There's your cylinder. And there's your piston there. You have your cam chain, and what we'll do is take and spin this so the piston is, if we're still up, we came off the sprocket down here, so we're not, oh, there we go. And we'll pull that piston. Now how we're going to do that is take a pick or a small screwdriver, stick it in the end of that, where that piston pin goes through, and grab the circlip that's there. Let's pull the starter here, 2 8mm bolts that we already removed. You can kind of put pressure in there and pull that out. This O-ring right here seals that starter, and this case housing here, if this is dirty or not, this O-ring isn't good. It'll allow water to get down into the stator assembly. And then I kind of twist that circlip out, being careful it doesn't fly anywhere. Hold my finger over top of it. There's the circlip there. Now you can just take and push that piston pin out or put a little pressure on it. And there is the pin there. Now that piston will just pull right off. Now what you can do is just take that pin, push it back through, and then put that circlip in there. And there's your crankshaft, and we will flip it on its side here, remove the stator and the flywheel. And there's a couple stator bolts in there, starter gears in there. Alright, and we've pulled most of these bolts out of here just to save time, but a couple 8mm bolts around the outside. Like I said, we've been into this cover before, so we're actually missing a starter gear. And there'll be pressure on this stator, so it'll take a little bit of work to pull off of there, but it's a magnet holding it together. And there's your stator, and there's your flywheel there. And you will have a starter drive here. you'll have a starter drive here. And then some of the water pump and the oil pump pieces are missing. We will pull this flywheel. We'll have to get some longer bolts to pull this off. So we'll wait on that. You have your speed sensor clear down here, kind of beside the dipstick. Speed sensor. One Allen bolt, and then this has a couple O-rings that seal it. And there's that sensor there. Now we're going to spin it to the other side. Pull those clutches. And then when we get the puller, we'll remove that. Okay, we got a bunch of 10mm bolts around this here. Clutch cover. So we'll go ahead and start removing those. Alright, on this Grizzly 550 we have 12 10mm bolts here around the outside of this cover. We will pull these bolts. We're going to replace that belt, remove those clutches. Go ahead and lift this clutch cover off of there. There's a seal around here on the inside here that's going to keep it sealed, so make sure you don't damage that area here. And we're going to pull this cage, 10mm bolts all the way around that. Cage, here's your secondary clutch, here's your primary clutch. 4 bolts to remove that cage. Now this shaft right here, which is actually coming off the crank there, is going to go into this housing. And so a lot of times if this bearing is bad in this housing here, this shaft will stay on there. This will be very difficult to pull. That's an aluminum housing there. So here's your movable sheave, and on the back is your fixed sheave for this clutch. First, what we want to do is put 2 bolts into here, into the secondary sheave, and then you run them in. And what that does is allow your belt to go all the way in. Okay? So it opens this clutch up, so you're able to push the belt all the way in, and that takes all the pressure off this movable sheave. You wouldn't have to, if all you're doing was removing these clutches, you wouldn't have to do this step where you run these bolts in. But if you're going back together or replacing one of the other clutches, replacing the belt, you're going to want to do this, otherwise this nut will not go on all the way. This is just a regular threaded nut, so put that on. But the thing about this nut is, the threads are back about 1/8 of an inch to sit right down on top of these splines here. So if you do not put these 2 bolts in, push this belt to take the pressure off here and push this down, your plate here will be sitting on these splines. This will not seat all the way with the threads being back there, and this clutch will come off every single time. So you want to make sure that you spread these clutches just like that. You put Loctite on these threads and washer and put this on. If you do not put this down, this clutch will come off and you'll break parts. Okay, so take this off, pull this off here, and I hold it all together, and this clutch should be smooth. Okay, this will come out here. This slides back and forth. This is your fixed sheave here. There is splines on that shaft there that will hold this to the motor. Now here's your belt here. We can pull this belt off. And this belt looks good. And then we'll just be able to pull this fixed sheave off. Trash has got down there from the intake duct over here. So there's your fixed sheave there. Your secondary clutch is here. That's just regular threads. There's your secondary drive clutch. Now we've got 10mm bolts all the way around the outside to remove this inner cover here. So that's the clutch on the 550. Here is the inner cover. Here's a centrifugal clutch here, and we will pull the centrifugal clutch housing off this case here. 8mm bolts all the way around. And there's a gasket here that'll seal behind this case cover, so it will. You'll have to kind of break that seal down to be able just to pull that up there. There is the outer clutch cover, or the outer clutch housing here. And this is the shoe assembly. Here's your one-way gear. Now I only spin one way in here. Here's your clutch. Now get this clutch out of this case. It is as simple as pressing this out this way. Okay, a lot of people think there's more to it because it is difficult to get out. If you want, you can put a nut on here. Use your socket and put this in a vise. Obviously not putting pressure, not setting against this on the outside here, and hit down. If all you're doing is replacing the clutch, shoes, or the clutch assembly, you don't need to mess with this as far as pulling this off. This bearing just comes right out of there.